As a consultant or small agency founder who loves doing high-touch client work, you probably hate how fragile and unsustainable it can feel. You're great at what you do, your clients love you, but capacity is a brick wall that you're constantly brushing up against or maybe running headfirst into. You want more breathing room, more margin, maybe more revenue. But you're not really interested in scaling by managing a team, launching a group program, or building a course. Everything out there seems to require replacing client work with something else. But what if the exact same work you've been doing with clients could quietly earn you revenue, even when you're not in the room? Imagine this. You've built a rock-solid service. Clients get results. You've got case studies and rave reviews. You're fully booked. But honestly, you're a little tired. You can't keep squeezing in more clients without dropping balls or burning out. Everyone says, create a course, or start a group program, or create a membership, but those don't feel right. So it seems like your only options are keep grinding or pivot to a whole new business model. But there's a third option most people overlook: licensing. What if you could take the exact same frameworks, tools, and assets that you're already using with clients and package them up so others could pay to use them too? Welcome to Calm is the New KPI, the podcast where we challenge default business advice and break down the levers you can pull to create a calmer business that actually works for you. I'm your host, Susan Boles. In this episode, we're tapping into two of the levers from the Calmer framework that we can use to engineer calm into our business. First, we're tackling business design. So shaping your offers in a way that makes room for rest, resilience, and revenue. Number two is using efficiency to create margins. We're doing that by repurposing what you've already created so it can do more heavy lifting in your business without adding more to your plate. To help us explore how licensing can open up new revenue streams without ditching client work, I have Janet Alexandersson. Janet is the founder of Piggy Bank Legal, and she is an international licensing lawyer who helps consultants, course creators, and service providers turn their intellectual property, IP, into scalable, protected, and profitable licensing products. With 20 years of legal experience and a sharp eye for strategy, she guides clients through the full licensing journey. So from packaging their IP to negotiating big-ticket deals with corporations and universities. And if you've ever wondered whether the systems and tools you use with clients could be valuable to someone else, this episode is your permission slip to stop trading time for money quite so directly. So you help business license their content, their services, but I don't know that people are super clear on what that actually means. So kind of take me through high level what it means to license your IP.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I hear that a lot. So I think imagine something you've made in your business. It could be a little training snippet or a checklist that you help your clients work through, or a step-by-step somehow that gives them a reliable outcome every time. And you're usually out there doing it with them or for them, or kind of hand-holding in some way. And for content licensing, you repackage that as something that another business can implement for their employees. They can follow the step-by-step. Or if they have customers that are having the same problems as yours, they could resell that as a standalone content piece to them.
And from your experience, what are some of the advantages of licensing your content? So if we're thinking about like a traditional service-based business, they're doing client things. We're talking about, potentially diversifying, or they lose their one big client, which happens all the time. We have that one big client and then all of a sudden it disappears. Talk to me about why someone might want to consider licensing some of their content.
I think there are several different reasons. So one is definitely, yes, you want more revenue. And this is a way to scale revenue without scaling overhead as much or having to scale a team. For my own experience with licensing, it's a way to put your knowledge to work without having to market it yourself or find an audience for it or do all the things that you do to acquire your clients, because that's someone else's problem now. They're just essentially renting what you have made so that others can benefit from that. And it's kind of their problem to monetize it and do whatever they need to do that. And your job is then just to maintain your knowledge, update it, and sort of make that continuously relevant. So to me, that's the sweet spot, that you get to have more control over your business model and the way that you weigh your business against how you want to live.
We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, but when we come back, Janet is going to take us step by step through the licensing process. Hey there. Are you looking for new ways to design and deliver your services in a calmer, more sustainable way? I've got just the thing for you. The Calm Service Design and Delivery Inspiration Swipe File. It's a free resource that I've developed that's packed with 60 plus services from over 40 real-world providers just like you. You can browse by service type, delivery method, scale, support level, whatever inspires you to rethink how you work. This swipe file is all about helping you create services that are not only profitable, but also aligned with a calmer business model. Head to beyondmargins.com/swipe, or just click the link in the show notes to grab your free copy today. So take me through kind of a typical licensing process. Like, how does this process actually work when you're like, great, cool, that sounds fantastic. Let's do it. And then, at least for me, I'm going, so now what?
Yes. I think the first thing is to acknowledge what you've made. Because a lot of people are only acknowledging the content. We're saying content here, but knowledge piece or guided resource that they have made that they're currently selling. So the first step is to look on all the things that you have like in your archive or that you aren't using or that you didn't finish, and kind of think of people that you can't reach maybe, but could find this useful. So do you have something that could upskill an employee in a large corporation? Do you have something that would help them work more smoothly with a client? Or do you have something that would help the end client execute better as an add-on in their ecosystem? You could just add that on to what they're doing. So let's say that you're in branding and you help people figure out how to express their brands through their marketing. And you have a system for it. There's a formula and all the things for how to like build out a post and how to keep your brand guide relevant. So that could either be for a large brand department in a corporation where they want all of their staff to be up to speed always and use the same system. Or it could be for the agency that needs their customers to follow the brand guides and they're not getting them to do that, but you have a system to get them to do that. So now instead of them doing their own R&D and spending a lot of hours developing something that they don't know if it's going to work, they can just rent your solution and then have that be something that you update every year. There's different levels of what you can do. So you can also add hours of your time. So maybe you do a Q&A or you do some sort of review. But at the core, it's just them applying that piece of content or deploying it in their ecosystem.
So how do you see people structuring the step-by-step of this? So you've come up with the idea, you know what you want to license, you know who you want to license it to. What is the process to actually do that?
So the first thing you need to realize is that the content that you made for you to use or for your clients to use will not be the same piece of content that you're licensed.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Because you're not going to be part of the equation. So the licensed offer has to be the dummies version. The thing that you can trust people to execute without you pointing them in the right direction. So you're going to have to subtract and give up like the perfection of your thing that you made and kind of extract like what are the 2 or 3 things that I want them to absolutely nail. And you should focus it on that. I also think that the best success is if you don't build that out. You outline it. You have some like content pieces that are ready, and then you go talk to the people that you want to sell it to, because they're going to tell you if they need something different, something smaller, something bigger. So coming with something that is like, I've spent 2 years on this and it's finally ready. It's not the energy, because you're going to just be crushed by their feedback, because they're going to want something that is much more practical usually than what you're thinking about right now.
That makes sense. And I think it mirrors, how we think about selling our own products to consumers, and that like you should try to sell the thing before you build the thing, because frequently you'll go try and sell it and you'll hear crickets, or you'll get feedback that it's not quite right. So that feels very aligned. So we've created a dummy version. We're testing it. We've found people who do want to license this content. Now what?
Now you start to think about how to protect your content, because this is your business asset now, your IP. So what are the limitations for their use? What do you want them to pay you, and how do you want them to pay you, and how engaged do you want to be in the delivery, and so on. But I think the most important part is really protecting your ownership and the ways that they can engage with it. Can they, for example, white label this product and say that it's like from their corporation? Should it be co-branded? Should there always be your brand on it? And this is determined by the strategy you want. So if you want to have your brand growing in knowledge, it's good if your logo is on there. But if you're in an industry where you know that they want white label the most, maybe white label should be the most expensive option. So like figuring out your tactics around your content, and also having rules about how it can be released, how it can be shared, who can alter things, who cannot alter things. So I always tell my clients they should see their content as a rock star. And the release rules, which is legal speak, is essentially the rider that goes along with this rock star.
It's the I only want green Skittles in my dressing room, please. Thank
exactly. You. Yeah. It's those things. Like, what are the things that you want to go along with this content? What is the context? What are the limitations?
At what point should people be getting lawyers involved or consultant?
It makes sense to do it when you're packaging or deciding what you want your packages to be. So when you're in the process of creating one-pagers or for your offers, I think that's a good point, because your release rules will determine what type of offer you set out. So it's more practical than legal, I would say, when it comes to licensed products. So it's everything from you can only access the product on my server, meaning that you'll have a login. This is like how we deliver the content. Or you have 1 year access, and every year you get X amount of updates, or you get X amount of like Q&As. So thinking that through when you're packaging it, I think it's the best. So that's when you start talking to someone who's at least knowledgeable about it. And I think the lawyer, as soon as you get to what are the limitations in their use and what do I want to protect, because that also kind of impacts how you deliver the content and how much control you have over delivery and how they use it.
So where in the process do you see things typically going wrong, or some of the places where folks might get tripped up or run into issues?
Okay, I see two places. The first one being when they're approached without really knowing what licensing is. So they are happily selling a course or like delivering a service, and then a larger company comes and say, hey, could we license this? We'll offer you this. Or could we buy this even? And usually what they're offering is a fee that is more likely to match what you're selling it for as a course, for example. So if someone comes in and say like, hey, can we license this for 4 times what your course is sold for? That's someone trying to rip you off. And that happens a lot. So they try to get in on a lower price, but for you, it's going to feel like you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to sell 5 seats in one or 10 seats in one. But they just do that as a consumer and don't really even send you a licensing agreement or anything. So essentially, you've just sold them your IP and they can continue using it forever, but they're calling it licensing. Or they just send you a contract and they put it so that the licensing is in perpetuity, whereas it's much more usually periodical. Mm-hmm. That's an inflection point where people get into trouble. And I think the other one is the negotiation phase. So once you've sent them your conditions, they're probably going to have thoughts and feelings about that and push back. And this is probably going to be one of the biggest transactions that you've been involved in your business. So coming from that, you're kind of keen to make this go through. So you might compromise too much or compromise on the wrong things. I think those 2 points are critical.
Yeah, I think one of the hesitations that folks would have around kind of considering this process is this feeling that you are letting go of your baby. This is, your brainchild. This is stuff that you have developed over probably many years. And now you're going to let it go and maybe feel like, what is the right level of compensation for me to give this thing away that is no longer going to be exclusively mine? How do I protect it so nobody else steals it? How do I make sure that I'm getting fairly compensated? What would you normally say to people in that scenario where they're like, it feels really scary?
I think it's going to feel scary because it's something you haven't done before. And I think that if we start with the pricing part, you're going to have to think differently because it's no longer what it's worth to you or to the singular end user. This is what it's worth for the entity that is licensing. So that either means that they're improving something in their operations or with their workers so that they can have a higher ROI, or they're improving their bottom line by reselling it. That's the value now. And that's more ephemeral for you to grasp. So you have to do different kind of research and kind of figure out what that means. But I think the first stop is to kind of figure out what would it mean for them to develop this on their own. And even just looking at courses, there's a statistic that for 1 hour of a produced and ready to deploy course, that's at least 30 work hours. Anyone who's made a course will feel that is...
That feels accurate. So I had a financial course a few years back that I started the process of like trying to license and then kind of collapsed. But like thinking about developing that course, that 30 hours feels very real, especially if you are trying to deliver a lot of value in a very condensed amount of time. It takes so much more time to iterate enough to like really deliver the value in a short amount of time. If you're going to do a course where like you're delivering like everything, all, if you pack everything in, that's faster.
It's faster, and it's also, they already know that this is accurate because you've had results with this before. And this is only for a course. So imagine if you have a process for this is how you achieve XYZ, and there's a multi-step process and it's proprietary to you. They can't just use it without you. Like, they need to have your approval to use it. So coming to the protection part, this is a nice segue, because if you have a process, you can trademark it if it has a name, or if you have a lot of content, copyright applies here as well. So using those IP protections that you can sort of do upfront, and then in your contract have protection for your business secrets, include NDAs and non-competitions, and like they can't develop something that is similar to what you are offering to them, or they can't build upon it. Those are safeguards that could be in your contract. So them finding what you do interesting and wanting to deploy it tells you that they're already valuing it, and they would rather take this shortcut, because we're also talking about how much time would it take them to develop something similar or something giving them the same outcome. They don't know that. So I think we undervalue what we have made, because to us it's been easy, because this is how our brain naturally works, and this is how we explain it to clients, and we see it working for them. And we never really own it. Even for yourself to kind of figure out that this is valuable, just name it. This is the X framework to deliver X. Or this is the step-by-step process for this. Like, give it a name, and even then, like, it starts getting its own identity outside of this is just something I do.
No, I love that. So when you are talking about the protections, a lot of the times when it comes to trademark or copyright protection, the protection is one thing and the enforcement is entirely another thing, yes. Right? So like, in order to claim those protections, you still have to be like actively enforcing that when people are ripping off your content, or when you see them using it out in the world and you don't have a licensing agreement. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Without a licensing agreement, it is tricky. The cease and desist is your friend here, but if they're bigger corporations, they can take the legal fees and like they don't care, essentially. So then you probably want to go the PR route and involve giving them some bad press about ripping smaller companies off. I feel like that is the tricky part, enforcing it, as you said, and how far you want to go towards enforcing it. I think that is also why it's good to put your IP in these situations into a gated licensed product. Because then you can also state, like, none of this is public data. None of this is available outside of licensing. So if it's being spread, it's one of your licensees. And in your contracts, there's going to be penalties for that. And you can track it more readily.
So Let's put a little bit of a real world example to this. So you did this in your own business, right? You
Yes.
started licensing your own content. So what did that process look like for you?
So for me, it was a happenstance kind of situation. So I met someone who ran a professional community for VAs, and she needed legal documents that were specifically tailored to them for their services, but also website agreements and such like. So we had a process of figuring out what do they need specifically for their use case. She'd had the community for many years. They hadn't found docs that were a good fit. So I took the time, which in total was, if we're being transparent, 8 hours, to figure out how to like fully make that work for them, but also set up explainers for how to use it and all of that. And then we struck a deal where I deliver the documents and she sort of sells them and we split the revenue. And after that, I'm also available to answer questions in the community about the documents technically, not so much like giving advice. And that's been the system for other communities that I'm also doing this with for a long time. And some of them prefer to not share revenue. They just pay an annual fee for being able to resell the document. So those are the two kind of models. So for me, it was kind of organic. And I think a lot of people slide into it, but you can also be more strategic about it and say, I know I'm solving a problem. And usually it's like, in this case, a tag along problem. She has a course that teaches them how to become VAs and a community to support them through their starting up and like executing and gaining clients as a VA. But all of them need legal docs to do that. So a lot of the times it's kind of figuring out what would be a good tag along, because it's almost never going to be you saying, oh, I would have sold to these people through this specific channel. And you wouldn't have, because you wouldn't have access to this channel.
Yeah. So how did that change kind of your approach to selling to people? Because you are then changing the kinds of businesses you're looking to connect with. You're changing your approach. It is one to many, but it's one to many in a very different way, because the sale still happens one to one. The delivery happens one to many, but that's a very different sales system.
It changes the avatar.
Than most, if you're switching from service, you're a service provider to this is now your new model. What does that look like? How did you account for that?
I think for me, I've always been bad at sales, as in like not wanting to do them. Not necessarily bad at converting someone when I'm talking to them, just like not interested in convincing anyone of anything. So instead of going for like, I need to meet as many like end consumers one-on-one, I just need to meet people who host in some way, shape, or form. Or if they don't host, they have access to people who host. Like it's some sort of community aspect, I feel like. Even if it's not necessarily community, it could be professional or even a corporation that has a lot of distributed teams. I would say it's a slower pace because you are building relationships. Whereas before, I used to sell legal documents on my website, and I didn't really drive traffic to that. So this is not really a drive traffic type of game, I would say. It's more relationship building and meeting people who you could maybe even have a thought like, oh, actually, I don't have that type of product, but that would be a good match, and then have a conversation. Do you want to explore that?
Yeah, I think that is probably the piece that maybe is underestimated. So say that you want to license part of your IP, part of your knowledge, and you don't have somebody come and approach you. This is something where you want to take your business model in that direction, or you're trying to do this very strategically. When we're thinking about, hey, I have to go test selling this to people, or maybe those people are not in your network yet, so you don't even have access to go try to test this with the ideal customer avatar. How do you see folks approaching that problem of, we need to develop the network in order to then build the relationships to be able to try to test this idea? And how does that kind of impact the timeline?
Yeah, I think it doesn't impact the timeline as much as you would think. The key here is to essentially develop a idea of what your licensed product would be. This is we're coming back to the one pager, because as you start talking to new circles and expanding into the areas where you could find someone who want to license your content, you need something for them to remember your by. So you're going to have to like take a bet on like one of these 3 permutations of this content piece would be relevant. And you can sort of say, we license content for people who want to achieve this thing. And that's a good conversation opener. And for finding them, I find that they're closer than you think. It's just that you're not having conversations that are about licensing. So this is a much more corporate thing than it is a peer-to-peer, especially like online business thing. So there's probably someone in your network that knows someone working at a company that would be interested in this. So that's the first step. And then the second one is go to one expo that is an industry that you identify that this is the one that I think would be most interested. And it's usually really helpful to do that, even if you're sure that they'll be interested, because you're probably going to be the standout. There's going to be so many people selling the same thing, the same old way, and you're going to be like, hey, we can solve this knowledge problem for you. And that's not going to be the same old, competing with people in that industry. So that's a good dip into the thing. And if you can't go to an expo, find a community group for professionals in that arena and see if you can host a talk with them to talk about way of doing things and something like that.
I didn't really think about it, but yeah, it's a very fast way to get a whole bunch of feedback all at once. I think a lot of times those of us who have primarily online businesses forget about there are places in the real world where local businesses are doing this or more corporate businesses are doing this, and we kind of forget the real world exists.
Yes.
So when you are working with clients on this, what part of the process are you helping them?
So I help them take what they already have knowledge-wise and repackage that for licensing. So what we talked about, like coming up with your different offers, the different tiers, I make them do a little bit of homework and figure out like what are the one-pagers, what are the potential industries that this could be applied to. So we do a lot of this work on identifying industries and how they want to be interacting with your content upfront. And then I create a draft for a master licensing agreement. And I also make my clients sit through a masterclass on their licensing agreement so that they know what it means and how to defend it. And I also build in concession points so that they're prepped for negotiations. So there's always things that they know they can give on and also things that are more likely to be targeted. And then also help them start onboarding other licensees with SOPs and templates for hosting kickoff calls and like tracking usage and evaluating them for renewals and such. But a lot of them come when they are either first tapped, like, hey, do you do licensing? Or they come knowing that they want to grow their business, but they really, in most cases, don't want to build out a team any bigger than they have. So they're like, what do I do instead?
Okay. And how fully formed does the idea of what they want to license need to be?
It doesn't have to be formed at all. The idea, what they want to license, the system that they are using already has to be something that they know gives a reliable outcome when they do it or when they help someone through it.
Okay. So there does need to be some evidence of proven results, but the idea of how we're going to create a product to be licensed from this process or system or piece of IP, that Pete doesn't need to be.
And it doesn't have to mean that you have a thing that is like, oh, this is how I always done. It could be like several things that you have done and then you put them together. But it is easier to sell something when you can say like, this is something that I've been using with clients for this long and you can see someone have an outcome, or this is how we have upskilled. So that's mostly for the sake of me feeling confident that they can be successful. But you can start with something that you haven't made yet and do it from scratch and license that as well. Don't let me stop you.
If somebody was thinking about embarking on this, how much time would you say they should commit to this project? How much of their capacity or their availability should they expect to commit to the licensing process? Because essentially we're talking about considering building a second business while you're doing your original business.
Yeah, I would say a good rule of thumb for kind of figuring out what your offer is and kind of discerning the market, starting to get out testing. If you just want to do it slow and steady, I would do a quarter of that and do 1 day a week. or like 1 of 5 working days. Be fully in that mindset that day instead of like dotting it out. Because if you dot it out, I've seen people kind of
trying to spread it out,
come back slowly, creeping back to like the service business model or like the product business model, because that's your default. So you kind of have to be in that environment solely. And then for the sales process, I try to encourage my clients to leverage these bigger events. So it's not something they have to do consistently over and over and over and kind of churn that out. So it's more about becoming known for someone who has this asset in relation to those industries, more so than like blasting social media with this content. Also, like you don't see a lot of people saying, hey, I closed the licensing deal, because most of these deals are not public. They're white labeled or like,
yeah.
So it's not something where you really have to market that on social media in that sense.
Yep, totally makes sense. Is there anything during this process that you think folks end up being surprised by, or they didn't expect some part of this when they embarked on the process?
I think people don't understand how much it can change your business model for the better and how much it can free up your time. What was appealing to me in the beginning too, I essentially in just like a year or two was down to a 4-hour work year, which was not what I was expecting. So I think that is surprising to people. And also it surprises people how much control they can have and how much they're in charge of. This is how you use it. This is how I will update it. This is what I will do. You're really in the driver's seat, more so than you would be probably with the service client. Because then you have like a little bit of the client is right mentality and you want to over deliver and do the thing. Whereas with licensing, you have like maybe 1 or 3 tiers that they can engage with your content in. And that's kind of it. And you got into that place by considering what is the lifestyle that I have? What type of team do I want to build? How much revenue do I want to make from this? Like really core things that you usually don't get to decide so specifically. And you do more or less with licensing.
What do you see as being some of the defaults that impact folks when it comes to licensing, whether that's default beliefs, decisions, etc.?
Sort of the pre-work to even starting to think about licensing is, I think we're very locked into the business models that we hear about on like, if you apply more time or energy or effort, you're going to make more money, or if you do these things. So when I start talking to my clients and ask them like, what would be your ideal work lifestyle? Like how many hours do you want to put in? How much money do you want to make from every client you sign or licensee you sign? Or ideally, like how do you want to communicate your knowledge? It gives them almost too much freedom. So they have to kind of understand that they actually do get to choose. And I think that's something that most people don't consider in their business, because they look at other businesses like them and they're like, oh, I should do it like that. And then they do it. In licensing, it's not quite as cut and dry when it comes to the content licensing. You get to have a say. And I think we're not used to having such a big say in how we build our business.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, we end up building default businesses because we don't know another way. You know, people come out of corporate and they say, great, I'm going to do this same thing I was doing as a consultant, possibly with the same companies you were working with frequently, is like how I see a lot of people starting their service business. And then we just kind of replicate the same environment that we had in corporate. You know, we're working in the same way. We are approaching businesses in the same way. And we're not intentionally thinking about what are the constructs, what are the limitations that we have as people, and how do we build our business to support us as human beings, versus the default is almost business first before people first.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it can also go too far. So like when I got my first licensing income, it was very passive. So I essentially like semi-retired myself in my 30s. And that was not for me. It was great to have a little bit of a break, but like I need to be creative and out there engaging with people to feel good as a human. I realize this is a privileged position to take, but it's also like, what do you need to sort of feed you, not like physical level? And what do you kind of client and customer or industry interactions do you really enjoy? Not so much because they're paying you, but because that is something that you find is energizing or like pulling you in the right direction. So thinking about the aspects of your work that you really enjoy from that point of view, I think we are rarely prompted to do that.
Yeah, and I love that this idea of licensing, for you, took you in a direction where you worked 4 hours a year and then went, oh man, I would like to be doing something else. And gave you the ability to take a break, but then come back into something that is something that energizes you, that you do truly enjoy. And I think the cool part about this is that this is something that can just give you some margins in your business, whether that is financial, whether that is capacity wise, whether it's operational, emotional, whatever kind of margins you need. This can be a tool to give you a little bit of breathing room and reassess if the way that you have always been operating is genuinely the way you want to be operating, or if it's going to give you the time and the space and the energy to think a little bit more creatively about how you want to structure your business and your work to have a little bit more intentionality behind it.
Definitely. And I think it's also going to give you the opportunity to discern what type of client you want to work with, because you don't now maybe have to take every client that comes to your way. So you can have a higher level of like, these are the type of people that I enjoy working with, and execute that. And it's also eventually going to become an exercise in boundaries. I just love how entrepreneurship is just like personal development in disguise, but
100%.
But it's going to be an exercise in boundaries, because you're now going to be working with corporations that are kind of maybe larger, or organizations that are larger and maybe much larger than you. So they're used to being quite set in their ways and dictating the terms. And you're going to have to learn to say no if you want to keep your business model the way that you intended it to be.
So do you see people, when they start thinking about licensing, is that something where they tend to shift their whole business model, or do a lot of people do the licensing and also keep client work or keep other things going?
I think in the past I saw people just shift to licensing fully, but a lot of the trends in the licensing industry are towards more of a hybrid model these days. So people want you to not only give them the content, but also educate their people in using the content. So that can be availability on many different levels, but like an office hours or Q&A, or like an annual workshop or whatever that is. So that usually means that you kind of have to figure out how that would fit into having a lot of licensees. Do you do that one to many? Do you do one per licensee? So you still get to keep a lot of your kind of hands-on work without maybe doing consulting and deliverables. And then some people just see this as like extra money to just like be more selective about clients, and maybe raising their actual service fees, because now they sort of are not worried about people rejecting them. So it usually comes with like a higher fee being involved in getting a different type of client.
A higher fee, because you can get the results from the product if you can implement it on your own, but there is more value than in having an individual person customize that implementation. That totally makes sense. Licensing your intellectual property can be a great way to build more diverse revenue streams in your business, and also just create some more margins, both in terms of time and capacity, but potentially more profitability as well. Now, you might not be aiming for a 4-day work year like Janet ended up with. Those are pretty atypical results. But if you're wanting to grow a client-based business without necessarily adding more clients or getting rid of the clients you already work with, thinking about licensing processes you've already built or work you've already done can be a really great way to do that. More intentionally considering the design of your business, so what revenue streams you want to have, how much of a percentage of your business you want to be client services versus other options, that is a super powerful lever for creating a calmer business. That's why it's a lever in the calmer framework. So While licensing might not be a particularly common option, and it's certainly not the right choice for everyone, it is something to consider when you're thinking about how you might want to grow your business and still have a calm one. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay calm.